Well, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Peter Cowhey, and I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the School of Global Policy and Strategy. This morning is the beginning of 2 days of festivities tied to our 30th anniversary. And it is appropriate for a school that is a leading center of research and thought and teaching about the Pacific region as a driver of the 21st century global dynamics. This is a festivity and a celebration of ideas from people who are leading thinkers and leading practitioners from the public and private sector and from scholars from around the world. Today, of course, we are focusing on the role especially of leaders of thought and action from the world at large. Tomorrow, we will be featuring our own faculty in a series of panels exploring some of the major challenges of the 21st century. This is not just our 30th anniversary as a celebration of the past of our 3,000 alumni working in 80 countries around the world. It's also the beginning of our next phase of work. We come together at a time when the world has achieved a certain level of pessimism about what the options are for the future. And in exploring that world, we have to explore how our talents, our ability to do careful research based on evidence, our ability to challenge the types of analytic models that have dominated thinking till now, and our ability to serve both our students and the world at large by coming to notions about solutions to these changing conditions are all going to be part of the next phase of the School of Global Policy and Strategy. We welcome you as our supporters in the community. We welcome our alumni and our students of today, and we hope that you will be part of that ongoing exploration for the future. So with that said, let me turn to the first of our events this morning, which is a keynote address by Jeff Immelt. Jeff, of course, is well known to all of you as the former chairman and CEO of General Electric, where he had a long and distinguished career of leadership in multiple divisions of the company around the world. He is currently a senior partner in the venture capital firm of New Enterprise Associates. Jeff is, to my mind, a perfect launching point for the conversation of these 2 days because as a CEO, he had already begun the hard thinking about how the parameters of technology, changes in politics and geopolitics were reshaping the way that business and the global system of growth is going to operate in the future. And so with that, let me welcome Jeff Immelt to the stage. And Jeff, we're just delighted and honored you could be with us today.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be. It's always great to be in San Diego. I have to say that as somebody that's kind of lived around the world. This is easy to get used to, and as a retiree, you're always more willing to kind of be completely open and frank about everything you say. So that's easy as well. I always found I found of all the parts of business, the hardest to kind of get your mind wrapped around was globalization. It was hard to read a book or read a briefing paper or a magazine article and truly capture what was going on in the world. So as a business leader, I always found that this was something you had to kind of see from the bottoms up, and you had to kind of live it, if you will, in order to totally grasp it and lead companies who are part of it. I saw in the arc of my career, the company was 75% in the United States, and when I retired, it was 70% outside the United States. And I kind of went through 3 phases of globalization. I started as an outsourcer, then I transitioned to be an exporter, and my final phase is a localizer. And I'm going to kind of describe some of these themes in a little bit more detail as you go through it. But I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. When I went to college, I had never been more than 50 miles from my home. I was a physics major in college. I learned globalization the hard way. I wasn't trained for any of this. I kind of learned it as I went and observed things and things like that. So that's kind of the ultimate. And so even though philosophically I believed in free trade, the power of free trade, and expansive government business enterprise and partnerships, that's not where the world is today. And so as a business leader, you've got to kind of take things as they are and begin to build a strategy around it. And that's what I ended up doing in that context. I'm going to make 5 points this morning. President Trump didn't invent economic nationalism. This has been underway for most of this century, and therefore it's not going to change anytime soon. Point 2, in that context, businesses have to be better at localizing, and the old kind of tops-down global flows strategy is less relevant. Point 3, next generation technologies around additive, analytics, all of those things are only going to accelerate this trend. They are seminal technologies that all of us have to learn and all of us have to be good at. Point 4, we can talk about lots of other things, but the relationship with China is the most important relationship of our lifetime. It has to happen now, and there's no way to sugarcoat how important it is. And my 5th point is, I've always believed that government is the actor and business is the reactor. And I have always had great respect for people in government. Government has gone from being kind of the steadying force for a business person to being enterprise risk for a business person. And so you have to understand that that relationship is just going to go through a rockier time as we go in the future. So these are my points. I'm going to go through each one of them in more detail. The mood against globalization is not new. It didn't start in 2016. It's been underway for a long time. It is multifaceted for Americans. It has to do with globalization became too elite, too distant from the people on the street. Trade deals were poorly explained. The rise of China as a competitor was unlike anything we'd ever seen before. It just was a steady drumbeat. I was involved with NAFTA in 1992. I was involved with NAFTA in 2017. I'm old enough to have seen maybe one of the, well, there's other people in here that have seen that. The argument American business made for NAFTA in 1992 was inexpensive labor. The argument we made in 2017 was inexpensive labor. If you don't change your story in 25 years as a business person, no wonder people are disrespectful, right? So now on the countryside, look, guys, if we're just being honest, I've gotten speeches in China for tech transfer, not very open of them. I've seen European regulators shade the table to be worse for American companies than American companies. I've seen localization requirements in various countries around the world. I've seen capital markets that would prohibit American companies in certain countries from acquiring companies. So, you know, my point is this economic nationalism has a face in almost every country. So if somebody thinks this ends with one administration or with one leader, I just think our game plan has to be politically that we're just in a time period where tops-down, trade-based globalization is less relevant. Now, my point is, look, this started in the 1940s. 70 years is plenty of time for us to get our act together, but this is the world that we have to confront. In that regard, look, localization is now very relevant. You know, I'm not a trained economist, but I like looking at numbers, and you know, I find that the GDP growth is the same today as it was pre-crisis, but the rate of growth of trade has been cut in half, right? Emerging markets are going to be an ever-increasing part of the global economy. Asia itself, the extent to which that's the purpose of this policy institute is pretty self-sufficient, going to be even more self-sufficient in the future, right? So I think we need to understand that indigenous models, country by country, are kind of replacing global models in terms of how we have to build global growth as time goes on. And what we try to do is build a company that could survive in this. So in 2016, we had 28 countries that had more than $1 billion in revenue, right? So you could pick your way around the world. And I find, just as my fellow business leaders in the room, kind of the four things that matter in this regard is you've got to be more decentralized in terms of capability and thrust. 2010, I was in Ghana. There was a gas-to-power project worth 3 gigawatts of power. I had two 30-year-old beautiful young people convincing me this was the thing to do. And I realized they had no prayer inside the company being successful. The bureaucracy was going to kill them every day of the week. And I kind of made it my purpose to try to organize in a way that could be relevant to pull off these kind of global projects. Using what used to be a global supply chain, right? So we would make things or do engineering work in India, of which 95% would be exported, really using manufacturing and research centers to be more of the market that they were in, more willing to kind of be less part of a global supply chain, more part of a regional supply chain. Build as many indigenous models as you can. Look, if I could we have a great healthcare business in China and India, leadership, but if I could have indigenized all those businesses to be able to develop products, make products, and win in those markets, that's a better model than trying to do it from Milwaukee and Chicago and places like that. And then just holding the risk at the CEO level from far away. Everything looks risky. If I said to you guys, look, you can pick one. Build a gas power plant in Nigeria or a nuclear power plant in the US. Which one is safer? Nigeria all day long. Okay, so you need to understand on the ground. And I think these four things are really critical for businesses as you think about ways to attack the world country by country and not in such a galactic way. Point three is technology is coming our way. No speech is going to stop technology, right? No editorial or things like that. There's kind of four technologies that I think everybody should learn, whether you're young or old, and it's kind of what's the nature of automation, what's the nature of analytics, what's the nature of artificial intelligence, what's the nature of additive manufacturing. And these are going to really drive great productivity in terms of how things get made, how assets get used, how much capital it takes to do anything. And I think the way to think about the next wave of digital technology is you're going to be able to do things at less scale. You're going to be able to do things in a more distributed way, and you're going to be able to do things faster. So again, if you think about where globalization has been in the last 30 years and where it can be in technology in the next 30 years, this is really going to change the competitive balance of how things get done, where things get made, and things like that in a very, kind of appreciable way. So it's good for all of us to learn. And, we can all have philosophy of like we're all going to be replaced by robots someday and things like that. Don't get lost in that one. Kind of try to see these technologies as they're coming from the grounds up. I just give you three examples. If you're the one thing we were in the oil and gas business or even wind turbine business. None of them are nice places. No offense to anybody in the room. They're on remote regions of Canada and Australia, the outback. And now if you are able to diagnose problems remotely using analytics, you can increase the productivity. So if you're sitting in a resource-rich country, you love AI. You love analytics. If you think about additive manufacturing, countries like Turkey want to build their own indigenous aircraft. That was never possible before. But with additive manufacturing, you can now make highly technical products around the world. So that's where regions win. And with artificial intelligence and what's called process automation, RPA, most of the jobs that were really, in essence, wage arbitrage. So if you look at the millions of people that were recruited in India, to do business process outsourcing just purely on wage arbitrage, a lot of those jobs are going to be automated. So there could be in India over time an immense impact on employment in that industry as automation tools take place. So I just give you a sense for, winners and losers around the world, but try to see it from the ground up. And then I thought, just in the nature of NAFTA and kind of discussion, I was involved with outsourcing refrigerators to Mexico in the 1980s. At that moment in time, there were 6 hours of labor in a refrigerator, and the choice to outsource was a 25% cost advantage. Today, the same product has maybe 2 hours of labor. So if you're making it with $25 an hour labor in the U.S. and you're shipping it back here, pretty much a lot of jobs that were strictly based on wage arbitrage are now kind of homogenized. So the way to articulate Mexico isn't because my appliances are going to be cheap. It's because they have great engineers. It's a great host market. There's phenomenal capability and things like that. So on technology, I just think it shifts a lot of the fundamental economics we've grown up with in the last 25 years. And you need to think about where you make things so that you can sell more things there, or you can have better insight in markets, because the technology, I think, is going to really harmonize a lot of what we do. So economic nationalism, here to stay. Better understand how to be a good localizer. Technology is going to facilitate that or make it happen even faster if you look at that. The fourth point I make is just China's not going away. We like to kind of think about it like it's something that's just a flash in the pan. It's extremely poorly covered, I would say, by the media, because you can never see it through a lens that's clear. If you're anti their position on human rights, you have one position. If you're a capitalist and are afraid that this isn't capitalism, you have another lens. So it's hard to get your own handle on it. It's always something I wanted to see for myself. It's going to have huge core markets. Almost every industrial market is going to be bigger in China than the U.S. Actually, healthcare is on the same trajectory as the U.S. Whether that's good or bad, we can all debate. But the healthcare market in China is growing immensely. They're graduating more engineers than the U.S. and Europe combined, so there's lots of capability. If you're on the consumer electronics or consumer internet side, they're so far ahead of almost 5G. They're so far ahead of almost any place in the world that it's hard to imagine. I always think about kind of the climate change. I'm a believer that we need to really, that climate change is real, that we need to really address it, that business needs to be investing and things like that. But if you're sitting in this room with a passion for climate, China's one of the few countries that matters, really. The reason why the solar industry has grown is because of China. The way to do electric vehicles at scale is in China. The future of coal is going to be set by China. This bilateral relationship between the U.S. and China is extremely, extremely important. And they use their wallet. Again, my generation had it easy. If I went to do a sales call on somebody like Qatar Petroleum, everybody went to school in the U.S. I wasn't going to lose that order to Siemens no matter what, because all my colleagues went to college in the U.S., Texas A&M and Wyoming. Now they go to college someplace else. We always had a balance sheet of Exim Bank and things like that. That's gone away. And China's bringing capital around the world. So tough competitor, not a perfect one. And believe me, there's plenty of issues around privacy and IP and things like that. But you can't see it from afar. We can't see it from arm's length. We've got to be actively engaged in this country with this region. And I would suggest for most Americans, particularly for most American business people, this relationship matters more than anything else that's going on in the world right now. So Peter, a challenge to you. The last thing I would say is, look, I've known all these people. Government is the actor, business is the reactor. We've enjoyed great stability over a long period of time. Now we've got a lot of volatility. In terms of business, you're not playing offense, you're playing defense. And you've got to be extremely thoughtful about what that means for your organization. You've got to have your own relationships around the world. And I had relationships with all these people. Again, I've known Bob for a long time, and we always had great support from the State Department and things like that. But, we were building these relationships for 30 or 40 years, not 2 or 3. So the ability to have sustained relationships really matters. And just, if in an age of populism, you gotta understand where other people are coming from. I put this up here just to say, look, there's debates that are going on in the U.S., supply side, demand side. That's why there's going to be elections. I would say to business, we're pretty much bystanders on these things. In other words, we used to be actively lobbying from one side or the other. I think whether or not there's a Green New Deal, you can say vote Democrat or vote Republican, but as a lobbying source, we're in a different world today than we were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, where we need to have a real commitment to the country, to our country, is in worker training and in developing the next generation of workers. If you're a monopolist or an outsourcer or stealing private data, it doesn't matter how good your people in Washington are, you're the enemy. And you should be ready to play defense, because there's going to be no defense for you. And all of us need to be mindful of that. And I just think kind of the interaction with government is different. So I put this up here, not to be, because there's so many people that are smarter about this than I am, but just to say, if you believe in trade deals and free trade, who's going to work on it in this era with these deals, right? Who's going to be the leader of that? So again, I just say it's more complicated for business than any time. And the fact is, 150 CEOs meeting at the Business Council in Washington, D.C., we're not a very sympathetic group. And that's different today than it was a long time ago. So you need to be aware of that. But there's a ton of stuff business can do and should do. And I think the elements of kind of patience and persistence and engagement are 3 things I think business actually can be good at. I mean, I've been a long-term investor in India. The one thing I can tell you that everything I tried in India failed, 100%. But while I was failing, I discovered something else that worked, right? So the ability to kind of see, I've been trying to sell a locomotive in India for 25 years, batting 0. But during that time, I built a tech center and a bunch of other stuff that actually worked. I think climate's kind of in our hands right now to keep pushing the technology forward and continue to drive great change. Connecting the dots of healthcare. An MR scan costs $200 in India. It costs $2,500 in the United States. Why is that? And what can be done about that in terms of how you go forward? I think the ability to kind of be, instead of going and doing press conferences, anti-Brexit and things like that, just being quiet and finding ways to figure stuff out as government changes. That's kind of the role we should be playing if you think about where we are today. And just the ability to connect ideas. And so I actually think the value of business today isn't necessarily in governments, and I don't say that at all negatively. I have amazing respect for the people to do it. It's kind of on the ground, doing the things we know how to do, engaging through tough times, things like that. So you've just heard everything somebody can learn in 40 years of globalization. We may not like where we are today, but it's not a bump in the road, right? So we just have to get adjusted to that. For business, kind of connected localization means we have to run our companies differently and have to be more engaged. The technology, look, everybody in this room and your children need to learn automation, additive manufacturing, all the things that kind of go with it and what it means. You can't know enough about China. I still go to China 3 or 4 times a year. Every time I leave there, I learn something new, some new insight, something different. And I just think, in terms of global business people, we're kind of on our own. We should help in the public discourse where we can, but we're just in a completely different mode today than we've been in the last 25 years. So congratulations on 30 years, and I think, and Peter, it's great that you're going to be fixing all these things. So it's really nice. And I'm happy to take. Okay, I'm happy to take a couple questions. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
What is the U.S. greatest edge?
So I actually think what is the U.S.'s greatest edge? So I would start with something fundamental, which is our colleges and universities have no peer. And you guys should, state schools, private schools, you name it, they're the best, and we shouldn't goof that up in terms of whatever we do. And then I would just say our entrepreneurial spirit has no peer really anywhere in the world, and you can do a lot. You can do a lot with that. I think it's here's what I would tell you guys on the China point. We can beat these guys. Okay, in other words, I'm not here like saying, "Oh my God, protect us," but we can't do it sitting in a conference room in Chicago, philosophizing about what help President Trump has to do and stuff like that. We got to get out there. But our colleges are amazing. Yeah, John.
Yeah. So right to that point about China and what we're doing about it, could you share any thoughts you might have on the whole issue of Huawei and how we're treating it?
Yeah, so, this is really complicated. And what do you think about Huawei and stuff like that? And what I was going to say to John is, look, I always expect everything's recorded that you say. I would say, let's bring Steve Mollenkopf in, because he's the Qualcomm CEO. Here's what I would say, though. Just macro, and let's not make it so much about Huawei. Let's make it macro. We did China and the U.S. a disservice by not being more vocal over time about those areas where theft of IP really happened. And as a result, we are where we are today. So I wouldn't just blame China, I'd blame American business, I'd blame all of us, because there are things we just should have said, this shouldn't happen this way. And I think the sooner we get that equalized, the better off we'll all be. Now, John, I would also tell you that that happens less than people really what you should know is that technically they've been on a trajectory like this for a long time. And the bad news for everybody might be they don't need it anymore. If you look at 5G, if you look at the consumer banking, almost everything's ahead of us. So I'm not an expert on the Huawei situation. I think we all should have brought this to a head a long time ago. But the real level playing field technically really exists. Yeah. Peter, I'm going to follow your lead. Yes.
I actually have a question that is not related to your talk, because you are saying businesses should be just accommodating to the context and making the best out of it. I will challenge that. I would think that businesses also have a responsibility, and particularly the largest companies in the world, to go against something that is really making difficult for you to have international operations.
Again, I've done it for, yeah, no, please.
Let me just finish.
Yeah.
I think that the voice of business in the U.S. is greatly missed in all these protectionist measures that have been taken all over the place. But I think it's very important that companies that are suffering the fact that you are going to be paying higher costs because of tariffs are more vocal to help keep the system as it's run.
Again, I think the voices have been out there and have been heard, right, for a long period of time. But I also really believe that if I were going to invest today to grow many of the places around the company, it's going to be in a region like Asia. It's going to be with opportunities of where the market is. And I just think, I would encourage you to just think whether the old playbook is really the right playbook for the 21st century. I would ask you guys to say it. I'm retiring. But I think if we keep going back to a playbook that was run for a long period of time, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
So how do we win against China? What does winning look like?
Look, I think the level playing field debate is huge. So I really think that the ability to kind of equalize and have open access that we have in China the same way they have in the U.S., and using a hammer with that and not being soft is absolutely critical. And I think being on the ground with sales teams, service teams, technology also helps. But the question is, are you going to be, do you want to be on the COMAC C919, the next generation of narrow-body aircraft? If you want to be on that plane, you can only do it with a China context.
So one last question from Don Rosenberg.
Great. Yeah, Don.
It's actually not a question. I'm just going to compliment you. I think I'm general counsel at Qualcomm. For years, I was at IBM as general counsel there. Your lecture today is spot on as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there are nuances that I'd love to discuss with you, but I think your voice is something that you should continue to project. And I'm asking Peter to make sure that as a board member, advisory board member for GPS, it's my hope that you will engage with us even more. When you were at GE, we used to watch the examples set at GE, certainly from a lawyer's perspective, compliance and areas like that. And I just think you have a voice that needs to be heard, and I hope retirement doesn't include not making presentations like this and sharing with us your insights.
Great. Thanks very much. Thank you.
First of all, Jeff, thank you for a presentation that exactly sets a great tone for these 2 days of thought and reflection on where we are heading as a globe, whether at the local level here in San Diego or in the global dynamics.